Hello, Designer Rachel here with the very first tutorial for all of you stylish tier members. Today we're going to be starting with how do you put a back shirring panel in your JSK? You may be wondering, how exactly do we get a shirring panel into the back of a dress? We've seen it on all the major Japanese brands, and many of the indie designers do this technique as well. This can be done with full back shirring, as in this example, or with partial back shirring with lacing. The options are endless. To start with, you're going to need a few supplies. Starting with a ruler. I prefer this metal one that is 1 inch by 12 inches because it is sturdy and doesn't bend too much, and it's just about the right size for what I'm looking for. This can also be accomplished with the help of a clear plastic quilting ruler if you prefer or already have that on hand. You will also need something to mark your fabric with. There are quite a few options, but some have their benefits and downsides. To start with, this is just a regular piece of tailor's chalk. Another option would be this chalk wheel pen, but depending on the color of chalk in your pen, they don't always come out of the back of the fabric quite so easily, even with washing. I prefer actually to fill mine with baby powder because that wipes off pretty quickly and easily. However, if you're using white, that doesn't really work out so well, as is with white tailor's chalk. Another option would be a pen more like this. It has a refill of chalk, and it can be sharpened with a little pencil sharpener. They're not quite as sharp and precise as some of the other options. You could also use a disappearing fabric marker. This one just disappears over time in the air. So depending on how fast you work, this may or may not be a good option for you. My favorite option, however, are these friction pens. They come in a pack of 5, and I will put a link to my favorite shop to buy them in the description down below. They are really neat because they disappear with heat. You draw on your fabric just like with regular pens, and then when you're done, you take your iron, steam over them, and the line is gone. If ever you ironed by mistake and you would like to get it back, just place your garment in the freezer for a day or so and the line should reappear. These pens are magnificent. I highly recommend them. To start off with, we have our bodice in a semi-completed state. In this, I'm working on the new ice cream shop dress. I have my lining attached and top stitched all the way along the very top edge to help keep everything crisp and clean. I'll be using that top stitch as a guide for later on. Now, what I like to do is fold the bodice in half just so you're only working with half at a time. My ruler isn't quite long enough even to do half in one shot unless I use the clear plastic ruler, which I can use, but it's just a personal preference to use this little metal one. And I think these do come in different lengths, so you could get a slightly longer one if you would prefer. However, this 12-inch one has served me well over the years. So I do like to start by making a 1-inch line just along the bottom. I line the ruler up with the edge of the fabric and trace along it. Then I move up to the top edge and mark a 1/2 inch from the very top edge of the fabric, and this is going to create your first elastic stitching line, sandwiched in between that top stitching and this new line. And then I'll go ahead and draw that line in. So for the purposes of this video, you can always measure your first 1/2 inch channel, and then we like to create 4 elastic channels. So you can see what your measurement is. This is 5¼ inches between this line and this line. So this will be the bottom channel and this will be the top channel. And then we need to create 2 more channels. So you can kind of measure and count and split the difference and decide where you want to draw the lines. If you are holding out and waiting on our pattern, your pattern will include a little template. Now this is just my bad cheater homemade template. However, it has all of the lines drawn on it that you're going to need. So you'll take that template, we'll have a bottom edge and each stitching line. So you'll just line up with your bottom and your top. I like to kind of give myself a head start with that bottom and top line because I know where they're going to be every single time. And draw in where is marked on your template. So then we can do that all the way across and then connect the lines with our ruler just like we did before. The reason I like to draw on the top line and the bottom line first is because sometimes, just depending on how your sewing goes, your lines may not line up exactly. So if you have to draw in your bottom line, your bottom shirring line, and then kind of adjust, maybe split the difference between how much where your lines are. Say they don't quite line up, as in this case. You can kind of split the difference and then draw evenly across without too much headache. I'll start here, 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 here. And it doesn't matter exactly. Shirring is very gathered just by nature. And so if your lines aren't exactly straight, it's not really the end of the world. We just want to give ourselves a good ballpark. So now we're going to take our ruler, find your lines, your little points that you've made, and start connecting the dots. We'll go through with all these points on this side, and we'll flip it over and do the other side. Now that one side's done, I'll go ahead and flip the bodice over. I like to kind of move the bodice so that you can see the stitch or the lines we've already drawn on, and then we will do the same steps as before, making sure the entire back shirring panel is drawn on. Alright, as you can see, last line drawn, and it goes all the way across the back of the entire full back shirring panel. We're almost ready to take it to the sewing machine, but first I like to use a few pins just to kind of hold everything in place. When you were stitching the lining onto the bodice, more than likely you have lined up the bodice side seam with the lining side seam as you were sewing across the top. You can kind of see this through this thin lining. So what I want to do while I'm preparing this for sewing is take my pins and make sure that these are lined up all the way down both side seams. And I do this by feel mostly. You can kind of flip it over, especially if you have a light colored lining that's very thin that you can see through. But mostly I do this by feel. And I like to kind of pin exactly where the lines are drawn, just to kind of hold it in place as we are doing the stitching. Alright, we'll go ahead and do the other side. The lining and the top fabric have a tendency to pucker and buckle a little as you're sewing these extremely long seams, or at least they do on my machine. Your machine may be different. So that's part of the reason why I like to pin. And you can always absolutely add in more pins. When I started doing this, I had a lot more pins than I do now. And that just comes with experience. However, on these long seams for the full shirred bodice, I do like to put pins along the center as well. Kind of split it in half, line up my seams, and stretch my lining and my fabric together with my finger in the slot like this. And pin in along the line. I'll just do these three. This one's not so hard to control because it is so close to the line that's already been stitched in by that top stitching. Okay, so that's it. We're ready to take this to the sewing machine. Now that we're at the sewing machine, I do like to start my seams working from the top stitched edge down to the bottom waist edge of the bodice. So I will start by lining up my needle here. Let's do a little reverse back stitch for strength. And then here I like to pull the fabric very taut between my two hands so that when I'm sewing I can ease as much of the wrinkling out as possible. Now some wrinkling is inevitable, I find, with this, so I just kind of ease it in the best way that I can. If the line starts looking a little wobbly, just stitch it straighter. If the amount of fabric through here becomes too uneven, you can take a little tuck. It's not really necessary for this to be super flat and evenly stitched, because with the elastic in it, it's going to gather it all together anyway. So that, I just kind of folded the fabric and pushed it under the foot. Do a little back stitch at the end and then pull it away. And we'll work from the top stitched edge on down. I personally like to only sew my stitches in the same direction. That allows for any pleating that may happen in the fabric to all face the same direction. You can, of course, work your way back and forth, just still working in this direction. But personally, I like to do them all stitched in the same direction. So we'll just keep working on these until we get to the bottom. sometimes if there's a little bit too much fullness and I don't want the lining underneath to pucker, I will ease my hands along each side of the presser foot to make sure that it kind of evenly gathers along. I just kind of gauge which hand motion I like to use based on what the fabric tension looks like. And when I start and stop each stitch, I'm only going right up to the seam edge itself, not going past onto the front of the bodice. Another way to make a nice crisp pleat is to put the needle position down, lift the presser foot, and then tuck the fullness under the foot, put it back down. It creates a nice sharp little pleat. And then you continue on your way. You can often tell when you're starting to have too much fullness and you might need to take a little tuck. It will start to buckle and pucker, and oftentimes I'll get the same even tuck all the way down each pair of stitches. Then at the very end, once I've completed all of my stitches, I take out all the pins and I clip off the loose threads. Part of me only doing them in one direction is so that I only have loose threads on one side of the bodice to worry about. I know some people like to wait to clip all their threads until they're done sewing the garment, but I like to take the little bit of extra time in between each step to do that, just so that I don't forget later. And there you have it. Now that we've stitched in all the lines, it may be a little hard to see, but you can kind of see that it's puckered just a tad. I take it back over to my ironing table, and I like to take a tailor's ham, which is this big padded felt roll, and I use this just so that I'm not ironing on top of the rest of the bodice where it might get lumpy. And I kind of just place it underneath to give myself a nice smooth ironing surface that won't reach the rest of the bodice. However, if you have a side zipper and you can lay your bodice flat, then more power to you. That's probably the easiest way to iron a bodice. Time to watch the magic. We'll take our iron, put a little steam on it, and voila, your line has completely disappeared. And it will stay gone unless you, for whatever reason, put your garment in the freezer. Like, say if you're trying to remove odor smells. However, just giving it another quick iron will make the lines go away again. That's what I love so much about these friction pens. If you've used a chalk pen, this would be the step in which you'd probably want to wash the bodice and wash all the chalk lines out before you move on to attaching the skirt. Or if you've used the pen that disappears with time and air, then you can just wait and it'll go away on its own. If it doesn't go away, it does have a racing side that will help remove any of the pen marks that didn't go away on their own. All right, so that's it. This is how I stitch in shirring lines. From here, I would attach the skirt to the bodice, and then once the skirt is attached, then we would thread the 1/4 inch elastic through these channels that we've created. They're open on both ends, and then you would tack down your elastic. Pretty simple, yeah? I hope you enjoyed this mini tutorial telling you how I put in a back shirring panel. If you have suggestions for future tutorials, please let me know. I would love to hear from you. There's lots of different topics that we can cover, and I look forward to sharing all of my knowledge with you. Thanks. Bye.